today we're going to look at two movies, two creature features about disembodied brains. The Brain That Wouldn't Die and Donovan's Brain.
Brain and brain, what is brain?
What you see is real. What's done is done, and what I've done is right. It's the work of science.
I remember fire.
Yoakum's death was no accident. Donovan engineered it.
And the same thing could happen to us. Donovan could kill us the same way he killed Yoakum.
That's right.
First, The Brain That Wouldn't Die, or The Brain That Couldn't Die, or The Head That Wouldn't Die. That's a 1962 American science fiction horror film directed by Joseph Green and written by Green and Rex Carlton. The film was completed in 1959 under the working title The Black Door, but was not theatrically released until May 3rd, 1962 under its new title. It's a double feature with Invasion of the Star Creatures. The movie stars Jason Evers, Virginia Leith, Bruce Brighton, Anthony LaPena, and Ada Lamont. And it focuses on a mad doctor who develops a means of keeping human body parts alive. He keeps his fiancee's severed head alive for days, along with a lumbering, malformed brute, one of his earlier failed experiments, who's imprisoned in a closet. The plot device of a mad doctor who discovers a way to keep a human head alive has been used in fiction earlier, such as Professor Dowell's Head from 1925, and other variants on this theme. It shares several key plot devices with the West German horror film The Head. Dr. Bill Kortner saves a patient who had been pronounced dead, but the senior surgeon, Bill's father, condemns his son's unorthodox methods and theories of transplanting. While driving to his family's country house, Bill and his beautiful fiancée, Jan Compton, become involved in a car accident that decapitates her. Bill recovers her severed head and rushes to his country house basement laboratory. He and his crippled assistant Kurt revive the head in a liquid-filled tray, but Jan's new existence is in agony, and she begs Bill to let her die. He ignores her pleas, and she grows to resent him. Bill decides to murder to obtain a body for Jan. He hunts for a suitable specimen at a burlesque nightclub, on the streets, and at a beauty contest. Jan begins communicating telepathically with the hideous mutants. An experiment gone wrong, locked in a laboratory cell. When Kurt leaves a hatch in the cell door unlocked, the monster grabs and tears off Kurt's arm, and Kurt will die from his injuries. The film was shot independently around Tarrytown, New York in 1959 under the working title The Black Door. Producer Rex Carlton suggested calling the film I Was a Teenage Brain Surgeon in the style of similar titles of that time. You know, like I Was a Teenage Werewolf or I Was a Teenage Frankenstein. The title was later changed to The Head That Wouldn't Die. Some prints of the film used the opening title, The Brain That Wouldn't Die, and the closing title, The Head That Wouldn't Die. In his first cinematic role, the monster in the closet was played by Eddie Carmel, a well-known mandatory Palestine-born circus performer who worked under the name The Jewish Giant. He was the subject of a photograph by Diane Arbus titled The Jewish Giant at Home with his parents in the Bronx, New York, 1970. The main theme, The Web, was composed by Abe Baker and Tony Restaino and noted for creating a sinister mood. Reportedly, Virginia Leith hated the film so much, she refused to return for post-production. At least a few of her lines were dubbed by Doris Brent, who played a nurse in the film. After Joel Hodgson left Mystery Science Theater 3000, Michael J. Nelson took over, and this was the first movie that Michael J. Nelson would riff on in Mystery Science Theater 3000, 1988.
We'll make it a closed casket.
The operating room is no place to experiment.
He's dead. I can't do any harm.
But what does turning them into clowns prove, John?
Upon the death of Virginia Leith, her body was donated to medical science at the UCLA Medical School. You don't suppose that maybe they kept the head, I don't know, an intern who loved the movie? No. We gotta, no, never mind. Forget I said that. I know, it didn't happen. No, forget I said that. Now let's look at Donovan's brain.
I've had the top of her head off, but that's as far as it went.
Initially, I wanted to compare The Brain That Wouldn't Die to The Brain because it came out that same year. But I opted to use Donovan's Brain from 1953 instead because it more closely resembled the original novel by Kurt Siodmak. The novel has been adapted for the screen 3 times. First in 1944 as The Lady and the Monster, then in 1953 as Donovan's Brain, and finally, the same year as The Brain That Wouldn't Die, a film called simply The Brain, 1962. And Donovan's Brain is an independently made 1953 American black and white science fiction horror film produced by Tom Gries for Alan Dowling Productions and directed by Felix Feist. It stars Lou Ayres, Gene Evans, Nancy Davis, and Steve Brody. The film was distributed by United Artists and is based on the 1942 horror novel Donovan's Brain by Kurt Siodmak. I love Siodmak. I've read several of his titles, and he's done a great job. I haven't actually read this novel that he wrote. I never read Donovan's Brain, but I've read quite a few of his other novels. But let's look at the novel. The novel was an instant success and has been adapted into film 3 times. Since then, it has become something of a cult classic, with fans including Stephen King, who discussed the novel in his 1981 book Danse Macabre, and mentioned it in his novel miniseries It. Siodmak later wrote a sequel in 1968 titled Hauser's Memory, and a final sequel in 1991 titled Gabriel's Body. The novel was initially published as a 3-part serial in the September to November 1942 issues of the pulp magazine Black Mask. Alfred A. Knopf published the first complete edition in 1943, and it was provided to U.S. military personnel as an armed service edition during World War II. The story involves an attempt to keep alive the brain of millionaire megalomaniac W.H. Donovan after an otherwise fatal plane crash. The brain, however, has other ideas and begins to possess people.
Mr. Donovan intends to dominate the international financial scene. And a fatal accident will occur to all who happen to stand in his way.
Dr. Patrick Corey and his wife Janice live in a mountain retreat where Corey attempts to keep a monkey's brain alive after removing it from the monkey's skull. The private plane of businessman Warren Donovan crashes near Corey's cabin, and rescuers request Corey's help. Donovan is seriously injured and not expected to live, so Corey takes the businessman's brain for experimentation. Corey manages to keep the brain alive in an electrified saline solution after writing messages in Donovan's handwriting. While he is sleeping, Corey believes Donovan's consciousness still survives, and he attempts to communicate with the brain. Gradually, Corey begins to exhibit Donovan's personality traits, such as smoking cigars, using ruthless personnel manipulation, and walking with a limp. Janice and Frank Schratt, Corey's friends and assistants, suspect that Donovan's consciousness is using telepathic mind control to overpower Corey's free will. In the meantime, news photographer Yoakum discovers that Corey has illegally stolen Donovan's brain and demands money to keep the secret. It's interesting to note that Orson Welles played Dr. Corey in Donovan's Brain on the only 2-part broadcast ever produced on radio's Suspense on 18 May and 25 May 1944.
As I sit now outside my laboratory door writing under the heading Experiment 87 this final entry in my casebook, I know that these are the last words I shall ever write upon this earth.
Writer Kurt Siodmak was also set to direct the film, but in the last minute he was replaced by Felix E. Feist. The second of 3 versions of Kurt Siodmak's famous novel will be made in less than 20 years as movies, and the only one to retain the original title. Although this is, all in all, the version of Donovan's Brain that stays closest to the classic original, it is most noticeable that Dr. Corey is here a warm-hearted and humorous man, devoted to his wife and his hard-drinking friend Schratt. In the novel, Corey is a ruthless, cold-blooded, unfeeling fellow who treats all around him with contempt. So which movie is better? In this battle of the box office losers, Rotten Tomatoes gives Donovan's Brain a 50% rating, as the audience gives it 34%. The Brain That Wouldn't Die fares worse on Rotten Tomatoes with a 33% rating and a 28% audience score.
Transplant her to what?
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body. I can make her complete again.
Only a madman can believe that she could ever be like before.
Now, Nicholas Bell says that Donovan's Brain is wildly uneven. Ayers, in particular, seems bored with a scenario where he could have channeled a Jekyll and Hyde dynamic. He isn't helped much by an incredibly dowdy Nancy Davis, soon to be Reagan, forced into a catch-all stereotype of 1950s housewife subservience. Early on, she questions her husband's ethics of using monkey brains for his experiments. After demeaning her intelligence, he advises her to make one of her wonderful stews. And yet she serves as a maid, cooks, and part-time lab assistant. While his alcoholic lab assistant, a Rudy Gene Evans, is never held to task for his irresponsibility. Beyond its acting deficiencies, the set design also seems an afterthought, since the brain isn't an amphibious creature. Why no one addresses how it isn't drying out as it hovers above a pool of milky water in a tank is peculiar, not to mention how unappealing such a setup would smell. Matt Bronson says the brain that wouldn't die is one of those so bad it's good to experience at least once in a lifetime efforts. This grade Z cheapie is pretty wretched, yet deserves extra credit for being so brazenly bizarre. Critic Rob Gonzalez says, how can anyone not love a movie in which a woman's bitter, disembodied head snarls to a mutant locked in a closet, "I'm only a head, and you're whatever you are." It has as its proto-feminist heroine a woman who has been whittled down to her mind, which gives her new psychic powers that she doesn't hesitate to use against the men of science who presume to shape her destiny. Personally, I prefer The Brain That Wouldn't Die. Whereas Donovan's brain is a bland retelling of the C.O. Max story, The Brain That Wouldn't Die is enjoyable to watch. Donovan's brain gets boring less than a half hour in, and no matter what flaws The Brain That Wouldn't Die has, it is definitely not boring. Anyway, that was my comparison to two creature features that feature disembodied brains. What do you think? Have you seen both movies? Do you like one over the other? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. And while you're at it, I'd be honored if you subscribe to my channel, click the bell to stay informed. Also, check out the Carl Vincent Vampire Hunter franchise, and you can find that in the comments section below as well. Until next time, this is Kevin Given saying, live long and prosper, may the force be with you, and keep reaching for the stars.